Thank you for joining. We hope that you're going to be able to join many, many more times. We have these programs every third Friday, except for the month of December, and really try to feature events, people, a focus that is sort of in the human trafficking, say 201 or 301 levels. A lot of the people who've been joining know the basics of human trafficking, so we kind of move on to extremely topical areas, which we have today, and I'll get into that in a moment. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about Stack and who I am, who we are, and what we do. So, Stack, or the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center, is 10 years old this year. We do all levels of work with survivors of human trafficking. That includes direct care management, and it could be the provision of housing, both emergency and stable long term housing, to getting someone a cell phone, safety planning, counseling, and all other kinds of legal services. We do a lot with our program partners in both what we do directly to assist clients as well as how we partner in our community with other providers. In fact, that's really the credo of our agency is we do this kind of work only with the help of many, many others in our community, which I think probably all of you do as well. We have a focus in our area on our rural communities because, one of the things people always think is that human trafficking only happens in the big cities. And those of you, and I see somebody, from all over our state, and many rural areas are here, so that's great. And you know what I'm talking about. We have assisted over 250 people who have been victims of trafficking in the course of our 10 years of existence. And it's actually more than that now. That was our number as of January. And we've trained over 22,000 people in programs like this, as well as programs that are one-on-one in our community. Next slide, please. The other thing I want you to know about Stack, and you'll maybe, where are we at? We're at 334 joining now. So if we hit 500, we're going to have to ask people to watch us online, watch this after the fact. And know that all of our past webinars are available on the Stack website, and it's right there, surviveandthriveadvocacy.org. I really encourage you to go to our website so you always have information about these programs and many other things that are going on in our community. And we also curate some of the best stuff nationally. There was something out of the Human Trafficking Legal Center this week on income tax, really, on taxation issues, which you don't usually think of that when you think about human trafficking, but survivors have needs in that department as well. So now we curate national stuff, statewide stuff. We talk about our, Florida annual events. So please check out our website. We've got toolkits there. We have a youth and caregivers toolkit. We have a toolkit for agencies, and we have lots of other information that you can download for free. And again, we're always putting events up there. And let me tell you this, if any of you who are on now, if you're having a dynamite event in your community and say it is something that you've been working on and you want people in Florida to know or people in our community, please contact me. I'm at robin@surviveandthriveadvocacy.org. I'll put my email up there. We'd love to feature you on our event page. One of the things we do is we ground ourselves on the voices and the experiences of survivors. The Imagine Freedom podcast is a podcast that we started a couple of years ago. And in it, we only talk with survivors of trafficking. And I want to assure you that this is not one of those programs that I feel is exploitative when survivors are asked to talk about and discuss the worst things that have ever happened to them in their lives. It's not that at all. It's the wisdom and experience of survivors telling us what they want us to know so we can prevent trafficking and do a better job when we're working and walking with trafficking survivors. So please take a look there, QR code, wherever you get your podcasts, you can take advantage of that as another place to learn. I actually pull some of the information from these podcasts, what some survivors have said, directly into a lot of our training programs because they're very, very powerful and kind of impactful and really brilliant in terms of helping us understand. You know that times are tough, especially now, and very uncertain when it comes to funding. Funding for the services we provide directly to survivors of sex and labor trafficking, funding to do these kinds of programs. I need to tell you that we've never faced the challenges that we are facing now as an organization, and we do our utmost to survive. So please understand that we need your help. And the only way we do it is really with this larger village that's joining this program. And if you find yourself benefiting at all from this program, and you can, please make a gift. Any amount will help us to get to our next step and to continue both these programs and the life-saving work we're able to do with survivors. So today is a really, really important, impactful program. And I'm thinking a lot of you were, I hope, attending because of the title, just the title alone: Unmasking Traffickers, Exposing Their Tactics and Disrupting Their Strategies, Empowering Our Solutions. Very often we talk about survivors, victims, their needs, and we need to all the time. But often we don't really focus on what traffickers are doing, what is the latest in terms of traffickers activities, whether that's online and other ways. And I have to tell you, we've got two of the nation's, I would say, best experts to talk about this now. First, Marina Anderson. I need to say again a special thank you. I do it all the time, Marina, every time you're on our webinars. I think this is number 18 for you, DCF, and you have been amazing in terms of your support and your impact on educating people in our community. Y'all need to know that Marina has been doing this work in one way or another since 2002, starting out as a child protective investigator and a field support supervisor in Duval County, and working on child sexual abuse, human trafficking, and she's also got expertise, subject matter expertise in critical injury, domestic violence, physical and sexual abuse, and of course, is one of our statewide experts on human trafficking. I love working with and talking to you, Marina, because you have experience that's both garnered from, all the work you do in terms of research, but also it's grounded on what's happening today in our communities, and your experience and expertise is great. So thank you for being here again today. Um, Also, Detective Ryan Ellis. Detective Ellis is a senior investigator with the Clay County Sheriff's Office here in Florida and a task force officer with Homeland Security Investigations. He's been at it for 18 years, spending the last 14 conducting human trafficking exploitation investigations, including hands-on offenses and array of technology-based crimes and human trafficking. Um, he has been testifying to legislative committee, co-authoring changes to our laws that impact child exploitation, and how about this, Ryan? You're a two-time recipient of the Department of Justice's Investigator of the Year for Victims' Crimes and Investigator of the Year for your agency. You have presented many places, and we're really honored that you're here with us. It's our first time working together. I just want to say thank you, and I know we're here because Marina basically said he's presenting with me, and we've got to do this together because that's how we're going to do a great job. So everyone, Ryan and Marina, thank you so much for all the work and time you've put together making this presentation a reality. And let me turn it over to you now. Thanks.
Robin, thank you very, very much for the warm welcome and the introductions. And it's our pleasure, myself and Marina, to join you and everybody here on the webinar today.
Thank you for being with us today. We're going to hopefully learn a lot. So we're going to go over what is human trafficking, go over some of the language, tactics, whether it's psychological control methods or what are the traffickers' tactics on they use for recruitment. We're going to talk about gang recruitment, as well as substance use for recruitment and identifying commercial sexual exploited victims, and then how to report that information. So first of all, let's talk about the human traffickers. We know as far as Department of Children and Families go, if we're working with a minor or a vulnerable adult, we are mandated to report trafficking. And DCF here in Florida investigates all areas of trafficking. I know depending on the state in which you live or work, it may differ. But in the state of Florida, our social services will investigate all areas of trafficking. So it could be a trafficker led, so that's a third party's brokering that exchange for that sexual act for a tangible item. It could be for money, but it could be for cryptocurrency. It could be for Amazon gift cards, or it could be for a ride out of town, for food, clothes, shelter, for substances, anything of value.
Whether it's a third party that's brokering that exchange. So with gang trafficking, it could be a source of generating money for that gang. We know gangs are getting heavily involved in trafficking because it's a moneymaker, right? It's about $150 billion industry. So if they sell drugs, they got to go back for more drugs to sell. But if they can sell a person over and over again. So we definitely have seen that rise in gang trafficking and familial trafficking as well because of our opioid addictions. Families that have addiction, whether it's a parent or both parent and child, if they have no means to support that drug habit and they're have an addiction, they're going to keep going, trying to come back for more drugs. And sometimes they don't have the ability to be able to pay for those substances, but they have their bodies. So they may be selling their bodies for that transactional sexual transaction, or it could be for selling images of their children or images of themselves. So you also have that transactional trafficking. So there's no third party, there's no one using force, fraud, or coercion. But what is happening is they are exchanging that sexual act for, again, something of value. It could be right out of town, for food, clothes, shelter, for substances. But again, no one's making them do this. But if they are a minor, they cannot consent. So therefore, that would fall under the same category as sex trafficking, and we are going to investigate it as a sex trafficking case here in the state of Florida. Okay, who are the human traffickers? You know, they're not going to fit any particular stereotype. You know, they can come from any social, ethnic, gender, or racial group. They could be involved in gangs, whether it's national, local, international level gangs, or they may be no affiliation at all to one particular group. It's literally from your lowest level, you know, drug dealer, your local individual that may be exchanging sexual acts for the substances, or it could be your, you know, an organized group. It could be whether it's gangs or either white collar crime that they're running it as a business. So again, it could absolutely be anyone. Again, there's no single profile. They could be a boyfriend, an employer, a father, a family member, a coach, a teacher, but basically anyone that's going to exert control over someone. It could even be a peer. It could be a minor. Any ethnicity, any race, both men and women of varying ages. Throughout my career, I've seen traffickers be minors, be again their peers. I've seen, you know, a 93-year-old man that was also exerting control over individuals and was arrested in human trafficking. So it can really be all over the place. It could happen to anyone, and the traffickers can be anyone. They're not always organized criminals, but again, they could be. So they're not going to meet any particular profile. So, you know, they're not walking around with that big, you know, purple hat and that pimp cup, right? If it did that, it would make our jobs a lot easier to be able to identify who they are. They're going to blend. They're going to look like you and I. They could be working in an organized crime or running it as a business, such as in spas or massage parlors or brothels. They could be employers of domestic servants. They could be involved in gangs or other type of criminality or criminal network. They could be in agricultural fields or crew leaders. It could be an intimate partner or family violence situation. They could be labor brokers, or small business owners or managers.
All right, so we're going to talk about the different types of sex traffickers dealing with human trafficking. So oftentimes we hear about violent or brutal traffickers, people that are oftentimes using a lot of force, oftentimes introducing violence into those relationships. Romantic partner or traffickers, something to be mindful of many times when we interview a lot of victims, that their trafficker started off sometimes as a romantic partner trafficker, and then shortly after that became that violent, brutal trafficker. However, some start off just using complete force and fraud. We also have different types of trafficking dealing with business-oriented traffickers, such as CEOs, like a CEO trafficker, someone who's not just necessarily that violent, brutal trafficker that we picture, but someone that is more business-oriented, more better put together, at least visually out front. With the violent trafficker, something to remember that depicted in expensive clothing, jewelry, cars. They produce entertainment videos that show off money or enjoy taking pictures with cash or expensive items, such as like flashing those items out, things that we typically, I think, sometimes look at as being a trafficker. Utilize violence, threats, force, fraud, coercion to control the victim. Sometimes all of those things are present, and sometimes it could just be one or maybe two of those elements. They're more likely to be involved in gang-affiliated sex trafficking. So actually involved with different types of gangs, whether that be smaller gangs, larger gangs, or even groups. The romantic partner traffickers. This is oftentimes the most common type of trafficker, or what is referred to often as a pimp. Could involve the domestic sex trafficking, can portray themselves as a caring or a loving boyfriend or a girlfriend, even to inspire that fierce loyalty from that victim. Oftentimes can spend weeks to months. We've even sometimes seen, even longer, even going into years, where they're progressing that grooming behavior to mold their victim into being the perfect victim and gaining their trust. Again, these people, just like we see oftentimes in hands-on sex offenses, where children are groomed and molested, they're master manipulators. They're unfortunately good at being traffickers. They seek out their victim, those vulnerabilities, to capitalize on their need, that need to feel loved, to listen, to be desired. And as we know, those are natural human things that most victims want to be told that they're beautiful, that they're loved. They manipulate their victims using different types of psychological tactics so that victims stay or even will return to that life. And we often see this oftentimes like in domestic violence, where people say, why would they be there? Why would they go back to that situation after they know that they're going to be hit or they know that they're going to be battered? It's very, very similar, and may oftentimes physically abuse that victim. So the business-oriented, or often referred to as like a CEO trafficker, they're more likely to be engaging in different types of financial white-collar crimes. They typically run the operation just like a business, and may operate additional businesses. They're actually legitimate businesses. We oftentimes see this in different types of massage parlors, or even in other types of legitimate businesses, that there's a front, maybe a smoke shop or some type of gambling facility. They're most likely linked to, again, massage parlor exploitations, escort services, where they're advertising just as companionships or dates, or they're doing things in certain states where they might not be up front violating certain laws, but behind the scenes, they're engaged in an actual criminal enterprise. They may be very successful people in the business world or entertainment world. We've, of course, seen a lot of things here recently on the news with the entertainment world in regards to sex trafficking. And I think that's just something to be mindful of, that some of these people, even we see, are even what some people would consider pillars of society. And with human trafficking recruitment.
So with human trafficking recruitment, oftentimes it's going to occur in a 3-stage approach. A lot of times people think of like the movie Taken or Sound of Freedom, which are both great movies. And even if you hear based on a true story, that's what it is, right? It's based on a true story. It doesn't mean that it is the entirety of exactly what happened. What we see locally, whether it be here in Florida or here in our nation, is more of a recruitment. It's more of that lure into trafficking. Less than 1% of our cases have anything to do with the kidnapping element. Usually they are known to that trafficker in some way, shape, or form. Usually whether it's they're meeting on social media or gaming apps or chat apps or even in person. And it begins in that lure stage. So in the very beginning, they're paying special attention. They give compliments, affection. They're offering romance. They're starting to say that I like you. I have feelings for you. They may be introducing them to parties or drugs and alcohol if they have met them in person. Sometimes our traffickers have never met their victims in person at all. They met online and that victimization occurred online. But they could still be having that interaction. They're communicating online, they're webcamming and things, these online relationships. They may be sending them money or other means to be able to pay for drugs and alcohol, or setting them up with dealers to be able to provide them with those drugs and alcohol. They may be sending them money or even giving them money or taking them to get their hair done, their nails done, maybe on shopping trips to buy new clothes or perfume, cologne, taking them to the hair salons or the barber shops. They're going to promise that increase of popularity. Maybe it would be through social media. And we are really seeing this business element. We're seeing a new way of recruitment, offering to be their business manager, offering to give them, be able to market them so they have more social media followers, or where they can be an influencer and gain that popularity on those platforms. They may say they're going to be able to be more popular within their peer groups, right? So think about if a person was going to school, maybe they didn't have the best of things, and now they're going to school and they have new clothes and new items, especially expensive items, cell phones and nature. And their peers are going to take notice of that. Like, hey, how did you get those things? Oh, come to the party Saturday night. My girl Jenny will hook you up. Or hey, come after school today and I go live webcam with my friend Jimmy, and they'll send us money, or they'll give us items. Way to increase that popularity, whether it be online or in person. And then moving into the trust stages, they sell them on the street. They may start saying, again, I'm catching feels, or having sex with them. It could be in person or it could be virtual. This separates from them from their family or other positive support systems. So selling them on the glamour of that street life, they're separating them from those positive support systems. And then moving into, I've done all these things for you. See, I put in my 50%, you put in your 50%. I've marketed you, I've gotten those friends and follows to increase, and where you are now, whether you're able to go live on TikTok or whatever it may be, you've gained this new popularity group. Everybody likes you. These are the things that you need to keep doing for me. You need to keep producing content. And that content may start off more innocent and move to different aspects of that. They may start saying, hey, if you love me, like you say you do, you'll start having sex with my friends. And by the way, I want to record that. And then they'll get that material and they'll start using that against them. I have all these pictures of you. I have all this video content of you. And if you don't continue to do what I tell you to do, I'm going to send this to your parents, or I'm going to send this to your coach or your school, or put it on online. As a way of manipulation. They could also be using it again as threats. If you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt your family. I'm going to hurt your family pet. Doing whatever they have to do to manipulate that person to keep doing what they say they're going to do. And they look at them as that viable threat, whether that's that threat of, extortion, or whether that's that threat of violence, to continue to keep them compliant. So after that recruitment, that trafficker has broken down that victim's self-esteem. They've threatened that victim and their loved ones based on the information they've collected. They make the victim feel indebted to their trafficker. They suggest that the victim owes them financially, and they lead that victim to think they need them financially to survive. That victim feels obligated to contribute financially to support their trafficker. They feel exposed emotionally, mentally, and physically. There's intimidation and control. They feel confined, isolated from their friends and positive support systems. They feel bonded to that trafficker, and they feel like they have no way out. And again, going back to like the movie Taken, right? A lot of times, or majority of the time, there's not going to be any type of physical bond. There's not going to be handcuffs or any type of tying down or locking in a room, or, a dog box or something like that. They have the ability to walk out the door. But that fear is there, even if they think a bad thought, they even think about leaving. Something bad's going to happen to them, something bad's going to happen to their family, or they're going to be exposed. So they're going to keep doing whatever they have to do to make that trafficker happy, where that violence is not occurring or where that exposure is not going to occur. So when we're talking about that trafficker's control, they're going to identify someone, they're going to prey on that vulnerability. We all have vulnerabilities. Our vulnerabilities today probably look a little bit different than they did when we were teenagers, but we all have them. They're ready and waiting to listen, to do research, online on their social media pages and things, on their gaming apps, to figure out what is that vulnerability. And once they have targeted that vulnerability, they'll continue to try to mold themselves to whatever that person needs them to be in their life. So if they need a parent figure, that's who they're going to be. If they need a friend or just someone to listen to them, that's who they're going to be. If they're looking for a protector, that's who they're going to be. They're going to literally shape themselves to be whatever that person needs them to be in their life at that moment in time. They're going to try to gain their trust. They're going to gather more information about them. How's the relationship with their parents or romantic partners or friends? How's school? Are they being bullied at school? What's going on in their life? What's the most important thing for them in their life? Because that's what they'll probably try to use against them later down the road. They're going to try to fill those needs. They may provide gifts, stability, friendship, provide them a family or tell them they will be their family. We see that a lot, especially when we're talking about kids that are in care. And so maybe they're looking for that family dynamic, and that's how they're going to prey upon them, that they will be their family, or they will have children with them so they can create their own family. They'll marry them and be with them forever. They'll try to isolate them from positive support systems. So whether that would be parents or friends or case managers, mentors, therapists, counselors, any type of sporting teams, whatever it may be, any type of thing in their life that's positive, they're going to try to separate them from that person. They want to be their sole person that they're depending on. And then maybe that's when the abuse starts happening, or the threat of abuse starts happening. So in the beginning, how great you are, how beautiful, how handsome you are, how no one will love you the way I love you. And that really does make a turnaround where you discuss me, who's going to love you after they know everything that you've done. I can't stand to be around you. I can't stand to look at you. Immediately followed with, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I was just having a bad day. I didn't mean it. Let's watch a movie. Let's hang out. Let's go to dinner. Let's go shopping. Let's go get your nails done, your hair done, those type of things. You see those rotation of that kindness and violence, kindness and violence, very, very similar to domestic violence. And even with the diagram, you can see that circle, that stages of grooming. It's very similar to a power and control circle that you may see with domestic violence. And then that control is happening. They're using that fraud, that force, that coercion to maintain that control. And again, remember, if it's a person under the age of 18 or a vulnerable adult, we do not have to prove force, fraud, and coercion by our legal, local, state, and federal definitions, but that element is still a means of trafficking. We still see those elements. It just may not begin that way. In the beginning, they may be selling images of themselves, or they may be engaging in transactional sex for a ride or whatever it may be. But that manipulation can happen later if it gets in the wrong hands, or depending on who they are meeting. Again, those trafficker tactics, isolating and breaking those bonds. So now they don't have a positive support system. They're creating fear. Even if they think about leaving, something bad will happen to them. They're using that manipulation to make the victim question their capabilities, their mental stability. We see this a lot with the survivors that I've worked with, where they started questioning that, oh, it was all my fault, or this person wouldn't have did this to me if I wouldn't have done that. So really a lot of victim shaming, a lot of internal victim blaming. I've had many survivors tell me, well, they didn't put a gun to my throat, a gun to my head, or a knife to my throat, so this must have been my choice. But really, we need to really analyze what choice really looks like, right? Because when you have a lot of manipulation happening there, it really is taking that choice away from them and able to really see what does choice really look like. And again, rotating that acts of kindness and violence is creating that trauma bond. Again, they're taking the victim's money, or they're not in control of their money. Maybe they feel like they could potentially go get their hair done, their nails done, and those type of things, because that is going to have a return for that trafficker, right? Because a buyer normally is going to be asking for a particular nail color or perfume or clothes or to look nice or what have you. Are they going to get top dollar for that transaction if a person shows up, maybe hadn't bathed in a few days or doesn't look the best or what have you? So they want them to get their hair done and their nails done and clothing and all those things because they're going to get some type of financial return from it. Because it's always about the money when you're talking about traffickers. It doesn't matter what it is, that's all they're thinking about. They're making the victim participate in illegal activities and use it against them. So it's a means of that coercion piece, that forced criminality piece. They're making them commit burglaries or robberies or sell drugs or run drugs, and maybe even be charged. And they're taking those charges. Again, I've worked with many survivors in my career, and that's happened where I even know, I'm like, there's no way that this person had the means, the financial means to be able to purchase that many drugs that go back and sell. So I know that these aren't this person's drugs, but they're not giving up who it actually is because a lot of times it is their trafficker and they're terrified to actually say what's happening in fear of something bad happening to them. Again, isolating them and moving the victim. Now, there could definitely be movement from city to city, state to state, or they could be continue to be trafficked right there in their local community. We see it both ways. Sometimes it is more movement and sometimes not. Honestly, it's up to the trafficker. Some traffickers go from city to city following, whether it's music festivals or big events or sporting events and those type of things. And then you have some traffickers that just stay local and traffic people within their local communities. Again, creating that fear. If they leave, something bad's going to happen to them. That's something that they're constantly thinking about. And this is something that sometimes can even be lifelong. That when we are working with survivors of trafficking and they're receiving services and they have continued receiving services and then something triggers them, something maybe bad happens to them in their life. Maybe it's a death of a loved one or a breakup or, they didn't do well on a particular test or job or something, and something triggers. Why am I keep doing this? The only thing I'm good at is sex, and that's what I need to go back to. Sometimes at that point, they need to take a step back and realize, wait, I'm having these thoughts again. I need to reach out to that positive support person in my life, whether it be their therapist or counselor or mentor, to be able to say, let me process what's going on and why am I having these thoughts? That's something very important that we really strive, even with our lived experience mentors, that if self-care is very important, and if they do ever have a triggering moment, that there's a way to step back and take care of yourself, because that's the most important. Using that manipulation, it could be sleep deprivation, keeping them up for hours on end, giving them substances that's keeping them up, playing tricks with their mind, making them question their mental instability, constantly telling the victims that they're unattractive or they disgust them and no one will love them. Again, telling the victim that they're only good at sexual acts, and questioning why the victim is trying to do better for themselves. Why are you trying to go to school? Why are you trying to go through vocational training? Why are you trying to get off substances? This is the only thing you're good at. That's what you need to keep doing. So constantly questioning themselves and why are they doing this for themselves? Why are they not staying in the life? So it's a constant struggle, especially in those very beginning stages of working with the survivor, to be able to provide that positive support and the reasons why that positive things can happen, and giving them a lot of validation and understanding and kindness and space, and also being able to be understanding that sometimes it takes time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not 2 therapy sessions or 14 therapy sessions and now you should be good to go. That's not the way this works. A lot of times at 14 counseling sessions, you're just starting to learn what they like to eat. Sometimes it takes a while to build that rapport. And the same thing with law enforcement. We tell them, baby step it with your interview process. I know we like, as investigators, to be able to get everything from A to Z from that first interview. That would be great. But most likely that's not going to happen with these cases. You've got to build that trust, that rapport, providing that extra layer of support through those service providers to be able to work with our survivors to be able to get to the point where they're ready to start breaking some of these bonds down, peeling back that onion, right? I always tell people trauma, the way I envision trauma is like an onion. You got many, many, many layers of that onion, and you got to keep peeling back and peeling back. And a lot of times that takes time, trust, and patience to be able to do that. that again, that rotating that act of kindness with violence is how they're creating that onion, right? That how they're creating that trauma bond, how they're putting on those layers and layers and layers of that bond. And they're promising change their ways constantly. Oh, I won't do that again. Immediately followed with, the next day, something bad happening again. Blaming the abuse and stress of that victim actions on their behaviors, promising to love them forever, marry them, give them a family, made them feel shame, self-blame. They feel trapped and no way out. So addressing that demand, strengthening those laws, criminalizing the purchase of sex, law enforcement should target buyers, not the victims, increase those penalties for buyers, and combating online solicitation. Really understanding those public awareness campaigns, educating the public, mandated reporting, just saturating awareness, which is one reason why we are here today, and continue to provide trainings within the community, as well as our mandated reporters. Engaging in the local leaders, right, to understand what trafficking is and that it is happening in every area, regardless of where you live, whether you're in a small town, rural area, or a very large urban area. You're going to have trafficking. If you have gangs, you're going to have trafficking. If you have narcotics issues, you're going to have trafficking. You have the internet, you're probably going to have trafficking. So it really doesn't matter where you are. And sometimes traffickers will target more rural areas because they know that most likely the parents' guards are down, the community's guards are down, not in my small town community. And they will sometimes think that they can kind of evade law enforcement by staying at the hotels that are in more rural areas or Airbnbs and stuff in rural areas. So getting out there and really saturating this information and getting law enforcement trained is very important as well. And we've been really doing that a lot with Ryan and I this year. We've really focused a lot on law enforcement and getting out there and training and pretty much anyone that'll listen to us. And also creating that support for survivors, having that emergency bed component, increasing the behavioral health supports, mental health, substance abuse, detox, creating safe spaces to determine the level of treatment that's needed. So that stabilization piece, having a period of time where there's appropriate evaluations to determine, what's driving the trafficking. And I say this all the time. If you have a significant substance addiction or significant mental health, and that is not stabilized first, then you're setting yourself up for failure later down the road when you're talking about service delivery. You have to stabilize and then start moving forward with that. It doesn't mean that you can't provide wraparound services from the beginning, but you have to provide those basic needs. When was the last time they ate? When was the last time they slept? Where are they going to go after you meet with them today? Do they have a safe space? Again, stabilizing that substance abuse. Do they need detox? Do they need residential treatment? Do they need medication management or evaluation? So really looking at that. That healthcare piece as well, their STD, STI checks, making sure you're offering that, making sure that they're healthy and they're okay. Unfortunately, I've worked with many survivors in my time where, they had ongoing STDs, STIs and untreated. And, in their early 20s, early 30s, were having to have hysterectomies because the trauma that occurred during their trafficking occurrence and the untreated infections that they received led to issues down the road. So making sure that we're constantly offering that and knowing that that's just a means to be able to help and assist as far as a program model or as a provider, that should be part of your checklist to make sure that that's a basic need that they're receiving. So targeting victims. Looking at that coercion and dependency, impairment and compliance, reward and punishment and recruitment for coping. The substance abuse is a huge deal, folks. I stress this a lot. This is a little soapbox item for me, but substances is really what's causing a lot of the trafficking that's occurring right now, both with kids and with adults. And whether it's males or females or regardless how they identify, we are seeing the link consistently with substance abuse. It could be used as a means of recruitment. Maybe they're already experimenting with substances. Maybe they're already addicted. We also see a lot of traffickers where they may start off just, smoking marijuana or using alcohol, and then they get them addicted to more addictive substances such as heroin, methamphetamines. A lot of times they're lacing those items or giving them items or getting them substances where they think they're smoking marijuana, they think they're taking Molly, but it really has other things in it.
Very true. And giving it to them in sometimes larger quantities or more frequently to build that addiction even greater to where they're dependent on it more often.
Absolutely. We see it. It's almost every day, honestly, every time we're staffing these cases. And it used to be very uncommon where we would see an extremely young child, 10, 11, 12-year-old that would be, using pills or Molly or ecstasy or methamphetamines or what have you. Unfortunately, today it's not uncommon. We're every single day, it seems, we're staffing cases where these kids at very, very young ages are are testing positive and having access to these very, very, very serious drugs, including fentanyl, isotretinoin, and all kinds of other drugs that are very, very deadly. They're controlling them through that substance addiction. So it's a means of reward and punishment. So if they make more money for that trafficker, they'll get more drugs. They make less money, they'll withhold those drugs from them as a means to control them. And then it could be for coping. If you're dealing with sexual trauma every single day, you are having to have sex with people you probably normally wouldn't have sex with, or have to produce all this content that you don't want to be doing. And it's a means to just be able to numb. Just let me take this and just check out. And again, that's why we see so much fentanyl seeking right now, because fentanyl is an unusual substance where it makes you completely numb. So you can imagine if you're suffering through trauma, how that may seem appealing. Like, well, I just want to check out. I don't want to feel. I don't want to think. I just want to just chill. And that's what fentanyl sometimes will do. But we know that fentanyl is very deadly. And we know that even, like I said, with isotretinoin, which is also a synthetic opioid, but Narcan does not work on that. So that's a very dangerous drug as well. Again, substances is one of the most influential techniques for coercion and manipulation with victims. So I can't stress that enough. They commonly will use it to prey on that vulnerability into recruitment into trafficking, or they're going to introduce them just as Ryan just explained. Again, they're going to they could target them with existing substance abuse disorders, or either again, continue to get them addicted to more dangerous drugs. Using that as reward and punishment, just as I said before, trying to bribe them or reward them to comply or to please them. So let's now talk about some of the risk factors. So it could be a young person or a vulnerable person. Again, someone that's using substances, feels insecure, isolated, desire to develop that romantic relationship. They have no means to pay for their substance addiction. Again, folks, that should be a huge, huge red flag for you, that light bulb moment. If you're working with an individual and they do not have a means to sustain that substance addiction, you need to be digging deep. Now, they could be engaging in other forms of criminality, whether that be robbery, burglary, or something else, but something is going on. People don't give drugs for free. What's happening? How are they getting it? They're going to tell you their friends paid for it. You have great friends. They're not paying for these things. They're not paying for you to get your hair done, your nails done, and all these items. You cannot take that as a sincere answer or response. You need to go dig and figure out what's going on. That intimate partner violence, co-occurring mental health challenges, homelessness, or that instability of housing, criminal records, legal vulnerabilities, and they're testing boundaries and taking risk. We know that forced criminality pieces, and I've already hit on that a little bit already, but they could potentially be getting them arrested for robbery, burglary, for their, again, that drug possession, and then using those against them, or they're having them commit these criminal acts and saying, hey, if you don't comply, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to turn you in for those crimes that you committed. And so using that against them. Now, in the state of Florida, if there's a crime that's committed during a trafficking occurrence and you were forced, or they use fraud or coercion and the means of that, we could get the charges expunged or dropped, depending where they are in the judicial system. And that's both for minors and for adults. So again, that may not be for all states, but in the state of Florida, we utilize that quite often when we're working with survivors, and it can be a barrier. So if we're working with a survivor that has 12 felonies, and now they've completed a program and they went back to college or vocational school or what have you, now they're trying to get a job, sometimes that can be a barrier if you have felonies and you can't work in the career path that you have chosen. So what will happen is we have to go back and look at that and see if those charges were a means of due to their trafficking, and working to get those expunged off the record so we can get them into employment and be able to be stable and independent. So again, we're seeing that forced criminality for sex trafficking, recruitment of others. Oftentimes traffickers will also have victims recruit others. And a lot of times that's a survival skill, because maybe that individual just can't keep doing it. They feel like they can't continue to have sex over and over again, or to produce this content over and over again. And that trafficker is going to say, well, if you're not going to do it, then you go find me people that will. So they'll start recruiting, but they're still a victim. That's just, they didn't see any other way out. So we have to look at that for what it is. Now, we do have females and males, and regardless how you identify as, there are traffickers. So we really have to break that down. Are they a trafficker or are they a victim? What's going on with that recruitment? And sometimes it can be a little more difficult. We have to do a lot of investigating there, but it's definitely something we always look at when we're looking at someone that was a former victim but now is in a recruitment role, or was a former victim and now is in a trafficking role. What exactly is going on there? Using that fraud and theft, they may be compelled to commit financial crimes like credit card theft, or under threats of violence or addiction and withdrawal. They may feel that entrapment piece, that criminal activity ensure their compliance, that stigma and control of the criminal records. So they know they have these charges. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of barriers, as I spoke of before. Maybe that legal manipulation, the traffickers are leveraging that victim's criminal activity, saying that they will use it against them. So now let's move in. We talked about this quite a bit already, but that substance abuse. We know trauma can lead to that self-medication, right? Using it as a means to cope, to control, as a means to be able to control their anxiety, their depression, or other mental health issues. That childhood trauma can lead to substance abuse later in life, especially when they're having flashbacks or different triggering moments in their life. Trauma and addiction can co-occur through trauma and addiction, because they can go hand in hand. And that treatment for trauma and substance abuse, that effective treatment for trauma, is very important. We stress on this in most of my career. I've spent in sexual assault and sex crimes, whether it's human trafficking or sexual battery, and with children. And we, stress when these things happen, even no matter how young they are, when they are abused, that making sure we're getting them into some form of therapy, some form of counseling, whether it's play therapy, even when they're very small, or understanding that this could become surface later down the road. And if you see these signs, to make sure you get them the appropriate level of services. This is something that you cannot just not talk about ever, and it just goes away. Sometimes the feelings are there, even though they don't understand it. And that psychological impact profoundly affects the mental and emotional well-being. There's also the issue with the substances and psychological impact when it comes with investigations. We talked a lot of this when we were doing our law enforcement training, to understand that with trauma, oftentimes you're not going to get that A to Z response from a victim. You're going to have to take that time. Like I said before, it's like, with trauma, I always tell people, think about, throwing a 1,000-piece puzzle up in the air and the pieces go everywhere and you're putting the pieces together. You will get that puzzle eventually figured out, but it's going to take time, because they're getting flashbacks of information. Some of that's due to trauma. Sometimes that's because of substance psychosis, because, they're under the influence of substances at times, and they're not remembering, what day it is, or what exactly the sexual act was, or where they were. All those facts can get very, very confusing. And that's why it's so important to really pull together that digital footprint. What can you find out on their social media, on gaming apps, on chat apps, on their financial records, and different things, to be able to put other pieces of puzzle and not just focus solely on a victim's statement of what's happening. Again, there's a lot of guilt, shame, the loss of self-worth. Again, that addiction can damage their cognitive functions, the impairment of decision-making, have other health issues like depression, anxiety, PTSD, that social isolation, putting strain and stigma on positive relationships can be challenging as well.
And just like Marina said, I think one of the important things to remember is sometimes in gathering this information or doing those interviews, the best time to do it usually is not right after a recovery or right after trauma occurs. It sometimes is 3 months later, 6 months later. And I know that sometimes prosecutors, law enforcement especially, we don't always like to wait that long, but sometimes it's the best. And by engaging with NGOs, advocates, law enforcement, and educating prosecutors and law enforcement all together as one, and kind of coming together and tackling that exact issue there, and being able to explain why, just like with child victims of sex crimes, why they disclose certain things sometimes in part, or why trauma does certain things to memory, and why things can come up later, and being able to explain that, and then getting in front of some of the issues when it comes to like a defense, where a defense attorney is going to come in and try to attack what they refer to as inconsistencies. That's why trainings and things that we're doing here today are so important, to educate and bring everybody together to explain those things.
Absolutely. And then moving on to the physical impact, whether it be from substance addiction or just the physical impact of the trafficking occurrences in itself. There could be, organ damage. There could be physical things that could happen, whether it's current or later down the road. Weakening immune function, increased risk of infections such as STDs, STIs, HIV, hepatitis. Chronic use of substances can also lead to cardiovascular issues. Again, whether current or later down the road, respiratory problems, neurological damage, withdrawal symptoms due to overdose, and additional physical strain can cause long-term disabilities or sometimes even death. That spiritual impact, going through this, the trauma or ongoing trauma. It may be, again, current trauma, past trauma during childhood. That's happening, that deep sense of that disconnection of one's values, purpose, or sense of self. They may feel hopelessness, guilt, shame. Addiction and isolation also really interferes and they lose that sense of self. They lose that sense of, why are these things keep happening to me? What have I done to make this happen or deserve this? These are all things that we hear when working with survivors. It really breaks down that spiritual component. And a lot of our programs that we work with are faith-based. And sometimes that can still even be a barrier for them. Sometimes where they're trying to gain that back. They're trying to figure out, who they are. And why are they on this earth? What is their purpose in life? Because all they've been told, is they're good at is sex, but really being able to break that down and find what are they good at? What can, whether it's paying it forward, because many people that are involved may end up, whether it's substances or sex trafficking or both, maybe go on to be lived experience mentors or work in this space, or maybe that's not they feel like that's not their role and they go on to do other things, and that's fine too. But being able to create that safe space and that positive support network is so important, and building that spiritual connection. That emotional impact, again, from substance addiction and trafficking, feeling that shame, guilt, sadness, and anger. That cycle of addiction is creating emotions, reinforcing feelings of worthlessness and despair, and healing is required to address both the addiction and those underlying emotional wounds of trauma. So taking that proactive approach, first one, you can't be in denial. You need to be, when you're working with someone that you feel has a substance addiction, you need to be coming up with a plan, whether that's with your supervisor or with your team, contacting, whether it's Department of Juvenile Justice or Department of Justice, if they're involved in probation. What can we do to assist, to make sure they're getting the appropriate level of services and not duplicating services? That's really important too. If somebody's working a case plan through social services, but they also have a charge, so they might be working it through the Department of Justice or Department of Juvenile Justice, and then you're having, you this provider over here say you need to do this. Make sure that you all are communicating and working in that multi-disciplinary team approach. That way there's no duplication and not setting them up for failure. Support substance abuse prevention programs, being able to have access to treatment, support and recovery, engagement in the community through collaboration, implement harm reduction strategies, connecting with family and communities, and early intervention. People oftentimes ask me, how early should we be intervening? And I'm like, at birth, which is kind of a joke, but seriously, we need to be getting in and having conversations with kids at very young ages. Age appropriate, of course. I don't expect you to tell them everything, but at age appropriate conversations with kids, we talk about good touch and bad touch or what have you, but a lot of times people still think it's, this person that's going to pull up and this man that looks a little scruffy in this white van, right? And that's really not the truth at all. I think I've had one case that had anything to do with a white van in my career. It's usually someone they know or someone that they meet. So having these conversations very early on is very important. Same thing with substances, having those conversations of how deadly, people often think, oh, it's just marijuana, it's fine. Most likely it's not just marijuana, unless they're getting it from a dispensary or something. Most likely it's going to be laced with something else. So,
yeah, and just to kind of go back on something that Marina just said, that just like we see more times than not with sexual abuse of children, it is usually not the stranger at the park. It is their own mother, their own father. A lot of this trafficking, a lot of these things that are occurring are from someone that, quotes, loves the victim, loves the child, loves the woman, and then they turn around and they engage in this trafficking. So it's not always, again, like she said, the person in the van.
yep.
So again, reasons that people join criminal gangs: sense of belonging, protection, money, drugs, control, cultural similarities, common enemies, things that they don't like, acceptance of peers, recruitment, intimidation, and control of areas and turf. Sex trafficking tattoos for women. And we even oftentimes even see these also on men, or however someone identifies with these. Again, just to show you just some of the general tattoos that you'll see, something to also remember, that why tattoos are very important and why there are a lot of very, very well-known gangs. We also, when we look at some rural areas and even some communities, when we get into some of the music groups or groups that sometimes will mask themselves as, hey, we're just producing music, we're just singing, we're just rapping, we're just writing music. Oftentimes that is true, but that other elements that goes along with that are trafficking, drug trade. And, I've heard people say in the past, well, I don't have a human trafficking problem, we just have prostitution. I always correct people when I say that. If you have prostitution, you have trafficking. If you have drugs and prostitution, you have trafficking. Again, gang initiations, we've often heard very, very, kind of cliche, but true. Jumped in. They are initiated by a beating with other gang members or other people that are associates of the gang. They could be even blessed in that they're deemed worthy by, an OG, an original gangster, someone that doesn't require that maybe is brought in by someone higher up in the gang, or they've proven themselves somewhere else. Maybe another gang has kind of fizzled out, but this person comes in and they join this other clique, this other set in a neighborhood. They're sexed in, kind of like a dice is rolled, and then people kind of have their way with those partners or those victims. They can be jumped in, again, initiated by a beating by other gang members, and those can be male and female, and those can go both ways. Again, gang related factors, some important things: the sex victimization of women in gangs. And while it can be men or however they identify, it primarily is traditionally with women. The primary role of a woman in a gang is to provide sexual services to other male gang members, also sexual exploitation of profit. They basically use them as nothing more than items. They trade them just like they would drugs. But the sad part is if you buy a kilo of cocaine, you can cut it and split it a bunch of different ways and turn it into stuff. But a human, you can utilize over and over and over. And sometimes they can get so much more out of actually a human than they can even after narcotics. And they've realized this. This is that the sexual exploitation is for profit. Gangs, again, oftentimes use social media and websites to advertise. They can also do this through some videos that they put out, some of their interactions. The internet has revolutionized the way that we do things. Before, when you had to stand on a corner or you had to go to a hotel and bring people around, now some people can sit and never leave a hotel and work and run women, traffic them, and never even have to leave their hotel room or where they're at. They can set up dates, they can exchange money and currency. It doesn't have to be the person standing on the corner looking over there to make sure that they're still getting in cars, that they're doing car dates. They literally can do it from all behind a keyboard. Gangs often use tattoos or brand women with their own gang because they view them again as property. Gang targets, disabilities. People with mental health issues face a variety of challenges. Again, isolation, addiction issues that we talked about earlier, that those traffickers will again use that substance dependency. And we'll oftentimes see that maybe this victim is utilizing narcotics on occasion. They're doing it once or twice a day. But when they meet this trafficker, next thing you know, he's feeding them narcotics every hour. What that does is that increases their dependency, and then they just completely control them, rip them, and bring them in. Risk for gangs, the exploitation of men and women and children is a very, 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 very lucrative industry. They make more money on sex trafficking, even with the online sexual exploitation of children, with sextortion, with child sexual abuse material. These are billion-dollar industries, and they're a lot easier to traffic and move around. If you're trying to bring drugs or guns across a border, those are things that are right in your face. We know that's not supposed to come across, but when they do this and they utilize a human who they've groomed and manipulated, it's much easier to traffic and to come across. Again, the links between gangs and substances and trafficking. Again, we talked about earlier the feeding of addiction to generate revenue, the coping vulnerabilities. Victims of trafficking often turns into substance and coping mechanisms. Again, further driving themselves into dependency and into depression. I think that's one of the things that Marina hit on earlier. It's not only that drug dependency, but it is beating someone down where they're losing their religion, their faith, they're self-identifying, they feel worthless, and that they're controlling them. These gangs thrive on areas with poverty and lack of resources, where high rates of addiction occur. They're not always going out targeting the person that is being told that they're loved, that comes from a nurturing environment. While victims do come from those areas, we oftentimes see that, I used to say to coworkers that sometimes victims that we see that are re-victimized, it's almost like these traffickers and the abusers just can see it written across their forehead, or that they walk around with a target, that these people are so good at what they do that they can pick them out almost in a crowd and say, that is a vulnerable person. That's who I'm going to prey on. I don't want to give them any credit because they're horrible people for what they do, but they're good at being criminals and they're good at exploiting humans. Systematic change. This complex relationship highlights again the need for integrated approaches to combat gangs activity, trafficking, substance abuse, kind of bringing together to support victims with that village approach. The stigma and the perception that victims of trafficking and addiction are often left to seen with very limited access to support, making them even more vulnerable. We oftentimes hear people say, "Oh, well, she's just a hooker. She's just a prostitute." I actively go around in law enforcement and correct those things regularly and try to educate people and make them realize that, hey, people doing this, I can promise you, they don't want to be going out and prostituting themselves. They're a victim of trafficking. Again, how we can prevent gang involvement. First off, exactly what we're doing right here today. But again, do not be in denial. You must take action from the first sign of gang affiliation, even when you see it at the first onset, that maybe they're not a gang member, maybe they're not a gang associate, but there's someone that is just seen near an area where gangs are. The first sign of any type of gang involvement, you should staff that with your supervisor, staff that with a clinician, staff that with law enforcement. Again, establish a plan of action to clearly document the signs and concerns. And again, notify local law enforcement. Some law enforcement agencies, I understand, don't have gang units. Maybe they have an intelligence unit. Maybe it's a smaller area where it's just handled by a couple officers. But also don't forget, in your area, more than likely there is a state police, there are federal agencies and resources, or maybe even your district attorney's office or state attorney's office, depending on how it's set up. But again, make sure that we're notifying the appropriate people. So the identifying of sex trafficking victims. Is the individual showing signs of trauma? Sometimes they are on outwardly, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're actually compartmentalizing things, and sometimes we might see it surface in untraditional ways where maybe they're not cutting themselves or acting out. Does the individual have control of their earnings or lack of knowledge of their finances? Again, going back, I think that we see here as we're talking some blurred lines with domestic violence, with other type of crimes where we're manipulating those victims. Do they have items that they cannot afford? Are they showing up with AirPods? Are they showing up with, like Marina said, do they have their nails done? I've got a bunch of very, very, very great friends. I can tell you that they don't buy things for even me, even as much as they like me. Do they have items that, again, what I like to talk about, that they can't afford? How are they? Drugs are not free. How are they supporting their addictions and habits? Are they being isolated from friends and family? Again, kind of going back to talking about some of our traditional DV stuff. Are they being isolated? Are they being pulled away from friends, from families? Are they unenrolling out of programs? Are they dropping out of a local community college? Are they not showing up for vocational stuff? Are they quitting their traditional job? Are they affiliated with the gang, whether that's loosely just hanging around in the neighborhood? Are they even doing things where maybe the gang does not consider them an actual affiliate, or they're not actual member of the gang, but they're just utilizing them as a pawn, as just an item to hold drugs, run drugs? Are they just using them? What type of social media apps or web pages do they use? Do they have their pictures on there? Are they advertising them on sex work pages? We've heard in the past about things about Backpage. Now we're talking about skip the games. Years ago, we would see things on Craigslist. Unfortunately, Craigslist still does exist, but not a whole lot anymore. Skip the games. Are they posting them on these things? These are important things. Do they even realize that they're being posted on there? Sometimes we interview victims where their pictures are on there and trafficking situations are being set up for them, but they don't even really realize that they're actually being posted on there. They're just engaging in that activity because they're forced to. Do they frequently visit or stay in hotels, motels? Do they work in dance clubs? Where do they live and work? Do they not have a home? Is their home a car? Is it a motel, hotel? Is it somewhere where they're even in a homeless encampment where they don't have somewhere where they're going? These are all questions that we should think about and ask.
So let's talk about those physical and behavioral signs. A lot of times, even if they're being abused, sometimes it's not to the face, because again, it's always about the money, right? So the traffickers want to make the best money that they can make off that individual. So if a buyer is if a victim shows up with a buyer and they've got cuts and bruises to their face, maybe black eye or bloody nose, they may not make top dollar, but it doesn't mean they're not being physically abused just because you can't see it. It could be on their stomach, their back, their butt, their legs, somewhere that's less likely to bruise, or it can be covered with tattoo makeup. So don't just think, oh, just because I didn't see it means that it's not happening, because that is definitely not true. They could be exhibiting behaviors, their fear, anxiety, depression, submission, tension, nervousness. They may have some paranoia behaviors. Maybe they're having interest in relationships with adults or older men or women when they're children. Think back when you were a younger child or a teenager. You probably didn't have all, I'm so sorry. Your friends probably were not all in their 30s or 40s. They were probably more closer to your age. So if they're hanging out with all these older people, what is going on? What's the manipulation factor there? Looking at those controlling relationships. If you're trying to have a conversation with someone, their phone is constantly blowing up with text messages or phone calls, and you can start seeing the decline in their behavior. They look stressed out or fearful, like if they don't respond, something bad's going to happen to them. Unexplained shopping trips, that possession of expensive clothing, jewelry, cell phones, multiple cell phones, or again, those items they cannot afford. Not in control of their own money. Maybe they're using lingo or slang known for the life. They could be potentially things that you need to understand. We could do a whole class on this alone, so we don't stress a lot about it in this particular training. But making sure if they're saying things that are out of context, that you are asking them, what does that mean? Or what does that mean to you? If they won't give you those answers, you can Google it. You can Urban Dictionary it and see what it could possibly mean. But making sure you're on the same page and making sure that the language that's being used, you understand, and the terms that are being used, what context they're meaning. Because sometimes people say, well, I told them that. Well, how did you tell them? And the words that they used were like, well, I wouldn't have associated that with what you were actually saying. About that personal information, their secrecy about their whereabouts, unaccounted for time, maybe the vagueness or concerns about their whereabouts, or they get very defensive on their responses. They're staying late, keeping unusual hours. Maybe they have sexually explicit content on their profiles, whether it be on their phones or their tablets or their computers or on social media or apps. Maybe they have a tattoo that they're reluctant to explain how they received the tattoo or what the tattoo means. Maybe they're lying about their personal information, such as their name and their age. Maybe they have a fraudulent ID or no identification at all. So let's move into a study. We're not going to exploit anyone's identity. These names have definitely just been created. On this particular investigation, the tip was received through the FLA Safe Hotline. So in the state of Florida, we have our own human trafficking hotline, and it was also received by our Florida Child Abuse Hotline. Our child victim is 14 years old. There's an alleged perpetrator named Jared, and he's 21 years old. The allegations came in that there's concerns that Jenna is using drugs, that she has an adult boyfriend, and there's concern that the boyfriend is her trafficker. She has been seen with expensive items and cash, and it's believed that Jenna is involved in sex trafficking and online exploitation. So as we move through this investigation, these are things that we would do both as social services, but also as investigators through law enforcement to gather as much information as we can to make a determination whether the allegation is true or not. So in the preliminary findings, we find out that she is 14 years old and she's a freshman in high school. She lives with her mother and her infant sister. She attends a charter school. She's recently become withdrawn. The mother's reported changes in her behavior, such as her mood, her friends, and her clothing. The mother has filed over 10 missing persons reports with the police, and those missing person stays has been from 2 to 12 days. And she's been known to be recovered in hotel and motel rooms, and she's refusing to say who is paying for those rooms. So law enforcement, as well as social services, will begin investigation at this point. We know that she was recovered in various hotels, and they were rented under multiple people's names. The mother's reported Jenna returning home with things such as her hair, nails, and her hair dyed. She also has a tattoo of JJ on small cursive letters. She's admitted that she's been dating Jared for several months and they met at school. She told her mother that Jared has put his initials on her neck and they got the tattoos together to prove their loyalty to one another. So again, law enforcement and social services would interview the therapist. We would interview school professionals as well to try to figure out what they know and what they have observed. And this time they observed that she has been seen with Jared and that they've seen a violent occurrence in a parking lot. So they would also identify who is Jared and what is going on, what does his past look like, whether it's substance addiction involved, gang activity involvement, gathering those cell phones and other digital evidence, both from Jared and from Jenna. And then as far as investigative techniques, we would be looking at CPS. We would be working with our Homeland Security or FBI, our local task forces, Department of Law Enforcement, our MEPIC, which is Missing and Endangered Persons, our Internet Crimes, which is ICAT, and our National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC. We would be interviewing victims using trauma-informed interviewing skills, building that trust and priority, which we've been talking about all day today. Parent statements, collateral statements, cell phones and digital forensics, search warrants, physical and electronic surveillance, undercover operations, and that financial analysis, especially when you're looking at Cash App, Venmos, and things of that nature. A lot of the reports that we receive, especially if they result in a human trafficking charge, is usually going to have some form of a media response. So making sure you're not disclosing any identity of that victim that could potentially put them in danger. We also have the Human Trafficking Identification Guide here in Florida. It's on our Department of Children and Families website. If you don't know whether you should make a report or if you have enough to make a report, you can answer these questions on this identification tool. And if you answer yes to any of those questions, it's going to take you directly to the Florida Department of Florida Department of Children and Families Child Abuse Hotline web-based reporting. Of course, you can also report through the Florida Human Trafficking Hotline, the DCF Hotline, the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And if you're dealing with anything to do with a senior, you can also, in the state of Florida, you can also contact the Senior Protection Team. Our emails are the best way to reach us if you have any questions or training needs or what have you. Thank you for bearing with us. I cannot say that TGIF means more today than it ever has, because it has been a challenging week and a challenging day. But thank you for our patience, and I really do appreciate your time.
Yes, I promise that Marina and I do these all the time, and they never end up like this.
I know.
No excuses, but we just got done with a 3-day missing child rescue operation, focusing on missing children that have high vulnerabilities of human trafficking. And we recovered 24 children, not bragging, but we're bragging. So we've had quite a week.
Thank you.
And great teamwork, very, very good collaborative efforts. And really, it was an MDT operation is what it was. Thanks for all the hearts. And I saw a bunch of great questions, bunch of great chatting. I was getting distracted because I wanted to read all the chats and questions. And just to end it out with the last slide, what I tell everyone in law enforcement is, if you have to ask yourself if you should report it, you already know the answer. You should report it. When in doubt, report it. We would rather not need the information or not have the report than wish we would have had the report. So I'll turn it over.
Let me start with one of the first ones that came in, and thank you for an amazing presentation. What is being done to report and protect children, excuse me, in foster care that are involved in human trafficking and recruiting other children in foster care situations? Can you address that?
Sure. So in foster care, depending on their placement, so if they're in an at-risk home, or if they're in a safe home, so if they're in an at-risk home, our staff has to have 12 hours of additional training on top of their licensure. And then if they're in a safe home, they would have to have 24 hours of additional training on top of their licensure. Every child in care has to have a human trafficking curriculum. So within their own placements, they have human trafficking training, as well as in our school systems, K through 12 has to have a human trafficking training. Good news, in the state of Florida, we also have an education bill that passed this year that every employee, no matter what you do, whether you work in the cafeteria, you're a school bus driver, you're an educator, you're a coach, if you work in the public school systems or charter systems, you have to have human trafficking training. So I believe that's going to also help with some of the identification. But going back to the foster children and kids that are in care, making sure that we're having the appropriate level of services, and again, equipping them with how to protect themselves. I think that's very important. No matter what, whether you're a parent or you're a foster parent, you cannot be there 24/7. So kiddos need to know how to protect themselves. What are the things to look for online? How can they potentially be exploited? What are those risk factors of could potentially put themselves at risk? So really educating them and knowing that is very important. We're also about to launch a program here in the state of Florida with our independent living. So with our kiddos that are aging out or going into extended foster care, we are going to start a program to train youth champions or youth mentors to be able to work. It would be young people that have already aged out of independent living that want to come back and provide mentorship. So that would be an extra layer of support to not only have an eyes, but a positive support system and network to work with youth.
Glad to hear all this is in the works and the training, Marina. That sounds great. Someone else asked, a large percentage of trafficking victims are foreign immigrants, children, and adults. What kind of government assistance do they get after they've been assisted? And is it long-term, or are they deported?
Yeah, so great question. So I think generally speaking, I think we could all agree that there's not enough services, period, no matter what, for victims. And hopefully everyone is the squeaky wheel, talks to their legislators and their local people about improving that. But to answer that question, so federally, while there are a bunch of different programs through the Center for Countering Human Trafficking out of DC, where its headquarters, HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, also has a program where, depending on the circumstances, they can apply for continued presence, which will assist them with continuing and staying in the United States and also for certain crimes such as human trafficking, can assist them with a fast track for different types of citizenship, whether that's a lawful permanent residence. And also one of the important things is in any human trafficking investigation for a prosecution, for one, all these should be victim-centered approaches. And one thing that I changed in my investigations years ago, the best thing I ever did was realizing that it's not only about arresting the bad guy, which we all want to do, but it is more about the victim, and you put the victim first. And when you focus your investigations on victim-centered investigations, everything else falls into place, I promise you. So we realized that in order to have a successful prosecution, and this is not being selfish on our behalf, but we have to have a victim. We have to have them engaged, and we have to keep them, and they have to trust us. So there are things that are assisted with that. So the short answer is every case is different. However, the initial or the method, victims of human trafficking are not deported.
And we know also that that's why we have a TV. So we're going to have a program on immigration and human trafficking coming up. So look to that. Also, people had commented on the dearth of beds that are available for adults who are trafficked. And Marina, I shared the new RFP, so everybody can see that. Quick question, we'll do one more. Has OnlyFans had an impact on human trafficking? Do you want to talk about OnlyFans and what you might have seen there?
Yeah, so the short answer, yes. And OnlyFans has even had an impact in the child sexual abuse material, formerly known as child pornography world, which we also know that those things go hand in hand. Children that sell nude photographs online or are exploited online have a higher likelihood of engaging also in hands-on offenses and trafficking. So yes, any type of vessel that is used to sexually exploit any human, while I do understand there are willing participants that use OnlyFans as a form of, I guess, legal income and employment, that yes, we have seen that happen on there. And yes, if there's a platform that is able to communicate and meet people, it does have the potential to exploit humans in general.
I'm going to say thank you, but your information was strong and powerful. You haven't been able to, I'm sure, to see all the comments in the chat. They've been really complimentary. Several survivors spoke out. Thank you to all of you for echoing and validating what Ryan and Marina were saying, because that means the world. Wanted to highlight next month, we are going to have a program, the new Bright program, newish, I guess, Bright program and data-driven solutions. We're going to talk about that with the Bright program and the Tipster program out of USF. The month after that, Brent Woody, Marina, you mentioned expunction. Brent Woody will be presenting. So registration information for that one will be coming, but you can register for July now. Thank you again, everybody, for attending. It means so much to us that you took time out of your Friday afternoon to spend it with us and to learn about what you can do to be smarter, better, and more effective to walk with survivors of human trafficking. And let's all together end this. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye for now.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.